Well, let's get into Project Pascal because this is something, Jerry and I were looking into this and it was like finally, something that is well documented that helps us because this is a question that's come up at least twice a month in these different peer groups is I need to build my career ladder. I need to help support the growth path for the engineers and engineering leaders on our team. And this was one of the ones where we read it and we're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So can you rewind a little bit, Shri, and tell us a little bit more about the origin story of Project Pascal and your approach and philosophy around engineering career growth and growing the people on your teams?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so zoom back to early 2017. We were fast growing back then too, and we were adding number of people in the organization. And just like anybody else, if we were in a large audience and we had 1,000 people in the audience, and if I asked people to raise their hands on how many people have a really good career ladder in your company, like nobody would raise their hand. Like no, it's really hard to build this. So we knew it was hard to build. And even in my previous experiences, we have all had some versions, and it really doesn't work as well because it doesn't answer. And we'll go into the nuances and what happens. But we knew that was the case, and we were growing fast, and we wanted something in place, right? And the reason is employees look for clarity, right? So they want to be able to grow in their careers, and they want to know, how do I get promoted? How do I change roles? And what does it mean by I get this rating? And what areas do I have to improve? Like, you can't answer those questions unless, or you can answer them consistently across the org as you scale, unless you have some framework like this. And as a principle, we wanted to start from there and start improving. And the other thing that happens in many companies is you want to roll out to the whole company all at once. And there are lots of roles in the company, and the company is growing. It's actually extremely hard to just flop something in and say that's how it works for the next 10 years, right? Which is what happens, and it really doesn't work. So we wanted to not take that big bang approach, and we wanted to go incremental. And the thing that we had in mind is we knew we had to outline these growth profiles. We wanted to have it so that it can improve on its own. We knew we would grow to 5,000 people, 10,000 people, so it had to support at scale. And over time, it had to be a framework and had to have the principles that we had earlier, right? So on all the four things that I mentioned, it had to have those in it. So we started off with, let's build some framework that incorporates those things into the framework. So when we started working on this, the first thing I say is to make sure that you have an amazing HR partnership, right? The best thing that we had in when we started Project Pascal was to have an amazing HR business partner. If Osden is hearing this, she'll be cheering and she'll be like, "Yeah, yeah, it was awesome." Because that collaboration between HR and the team is like super critical. Otherwise, you won't get that right, because both sides have to understand the constraints of what can and cannot be done. And there are lots of frameworks in the market. You can take something that's generic and plop it in. That may or may not be most effective for you as an organization. So different companies have different constraints. So we were a pretty distributed organization. Even this was like before COVID and everything. We were very distributed. We had lots of people working from home. So we had a setup where it had to work on multiple geos and multiple levels and different like, scaling organization. So we had our own constraints. So we started off with, what constraints do we have and what kind of career framework do we do? So we started with, let's build the expectations for the role. Let's figure out what it takes by going from one role to the other. We started with engineering roles. And we knew there were other roles. There were SRE roles, there were testing roles, there were product management and designers. And we said, let's focus on one and get that right, or at least workable, and then we can expand it to other things. So we focused on those. We also had principles on, we wanted to make sure we had a dual career ladder, which is extremely important. You don't want all ICs at some point to say, if I have to grow, I have to become a manager. So you want to have the levels parallel at all levels in terms of P ladder and M ladder, like the IC and the management ladder. So we had those principles in place, and we had to define all those. So we had working groups for each one, and we had working groups for junior and for senior. We didn't try to boil the ocean. We actually didn't do uh, too much work at the higher levels. because we knew there were not many people and we could do that later. So we focused on the lower levels, starting with how do we get a new engineer coming into the organization? How do we grow them to the next level and to the next level after that? So we focused a lot on those lower levels of the organization. We came up with a framework, and then there was the question of how do we roll this out, because it's important for it to be successful, because you might have the perfect thing that you think is perfect, but if you don't roll it out properly and you don't have this mechanism, especially given the technology organization always has opinionated people, and you want to be able to hear those concerns, right? And there may be edge cases, they may be like the core cases, but you need to be able to figure out what it is and to have this dialogue. So we wrote that uh, framework. We published it. We piloted in a small group for a quarter, and to be able to get feedback, and then we rolled it out for the larger organization. And we had, of course, we had blogs, we had town halls, and we had special AMA sessions. We did a number of things to be able to get that in place on day one. And then we also had a couple of other things that we wanted to do after that, which is, this happens in many companies. Like, you put some strict processes in place, and then people are like, oh, it's so hard to get from this level to that level. It's actually easier to hire somebody from outside than getting promoted inside, and you don't want that. So you wanted to have checks and balances both for promotions and also for external hiring. And we don't want it to have a top-down process for external hiring, vetoing managers, and having a bar raiser. That was like Amazon's bar raiser program, which actually has lots of good qualities in it. We tuned it a little bit to have what is called a calibrator role. And what the calibrator does is, this person sits, a senior person who has done interviews just like a bar raiser, but that person doesn't do interviews but helps with the debriefing of the candidates. And to be able to say, these are the kinds of questions that you need to ask, and this is how you need to decide. And that helps us scale and make and train all these different managers across the board. And that calibrator role has actually helped us a lot in terms of just getting uniformity both for internal promotions and also for people coming outside. So zoom forward today, Pascal has become like the core piece of how we do performance management, how we do. We also have this manager training called AMP, Apprentice Manager Program, hiring, uh, the shape of the org, and how we decide on where to hire and how do we have the right mix. Uh, it's been awesome to roll that out, and we have also expanded it to different roles, and we are trying to figure out. And again, it wasn't perfect the first time, and it's not perfect now, and it keeps evolving based on the needs. But it's important to start somewhere.